My name is Dorothea, and I never thought I would break ties with my family, but life has a way of revealing who people truly are, especially during the happiest moments. It is precisely at times like these that the true nature of those you once considered your closest people comes to light. You'd think joy would bring people together, but instead, it exposes what has been hidden for years behind smiling faces and caring words. I met Garino 3 years ago at a tech conference where I was working as an event coordinator. It was one of those conferences held in anonymous hotel complexes with gray-blue carpets, smelling of thermos coffee and faded paper. He was sitting in the third row, on the aisle, with a notebook on his lap, as if out of habit, ready to jot down every thought. Everyone else in the room was eager to mingle, exchanging business cards, laughing loudly and somewhat theatrically, while he simply listened. There was a spark of interest in his eyes, not in the people, but in the subject matter, the core, the processes. And that's exactly what drew me to him. He was different from the guys I usually dated. Garino was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly intelligent. While I had always been the life of the party, as were all the other members of my family, there was something captivating about his calm demeanor. Without demanding attention or taking up space, he simply existed in harmony with himself, and it was beautiful. He worked as a senior programmer at a large tech company, and when he talked about his projects, about how lines of code give birth to something bigger than just programs, his eyes lit up so much that I caught myself thinking, here it is, passion, real and sincere. I fell in love with that quiet confidence, with the ability to keep the world at a safe distance while remaining utterly honest and genuine. You two are nothing alike, my younger sister Edwidge kept repeating, arms crossed over her chest when we started dating. He barely says 2 words at family dinners. She was 5 years younger but loved to lecture me about life, handing out advice as if she'd lived 2 lifetimes instead of barely stepping into her first adult one. Our parents, Aldo and Felisa, weren't much better. "Sweetheart, are you sure about him?" Mom would ask the moment Garino left the room, glancing around like she was afraid the walls might hear us. "He's so detached." I tried to explain countless times. He's not detached, he's just an introvert. He prefers small gatherings over big parties, meaningful conversations over small talk. But my family never tried to understand. They saw arrogance in his silence, personal disrespect in his reservedness. Despite their disapproval, Garino and I got married a year ago. It was a small ceremony at a friend's country house. Everything was simple, tasteful, without fuss or flashy decorations. Just the way we had both dreamed. My family was there, but it seemed like only so they wouldn't miss the chance to make passive-aggressive comments about how different everything was from traditional family weddings, how unusual it all felt, and really, how it wasn't a wedding but more like a quiet rehearsal. "I don't understand why they can't accept you for who you are," I told Garino one evening after yet another dinner full of tense pauses and double-edged remarks. He just smiled his gentle, patient smile and shrugged. "Not everyone has to understand me, Dorothea. As long as you do." That's exactly why I loved him, for his ability to rise above the drama, to not let other people's opinions disturb his peace. But things got much worse. Even his calm started to crack. It all began with a call from my mom last weekend. "Dorothea, sweetheart, we're having a family dinner next Saturday. Just you." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "Just me? What do you mean?" Mom hesitated, her voice softening. "Some relatives are coming, and, you know how Garino is with crowds. We thought it might be better." "Better what, Mom? That my husband stays home while I pretend to be single at family gatherings?" "Sweetheart." "Sorry, Mom, but I'm not going without my husband. That's not how marriage works." I hung up before she could answer. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking with anger. When I told Garino about it later, he just laughed quietly and shook his head, as if there was nothing more to say. But everything changed when Edwidge called. It happened on a sunny morning. Her voice was practically bubbling with excitement, overflowing with joy so vividly I could almost see her bouncing around the room with the phone in her hand. "Dorothea. Oh my God, you won't believe it. Liberatore proposed last night." She squealed, and I couldn't help but laugh. My heart leapt with genuine happiness. Despite all our differences, I loved my sister and knew how much she cared about Liberatore. They had been together for over 2 years, and he truly seemed like a good man, a schoolteacher who easily connected with people, open-hearted and sincerely kind. He fit perfectly into our noisy, restless family. "That's amazing, Edwidge. I'm so happy for you," I said, already grabbing my car keys. "You're at Mom and Dad's, right?" "Yeah. Come over right now, we're starting to plan everything." 20 minutes later, I stepped into my parents' familiar living room. The air was thick with the aroma of fresh cookies and the faint scent of the flower arrangement Mom always placed on the coffee table before guests arrived. Edwidge spotted me first, squealed with excitement, and immediately jumped up to wrap me in a hug. Her arms squeezed me tightly, almost childishly, like back when we used to share a bedroom. I caught a glint of light reflecting off her brand-new engagement ring. The stone wasn't large, but it sparkled tastefully and modestly, as if it had been made just for her. Mom and Dad stood by the window, both practically glowing. For the first time in a long while, Mom didn't look worried or displeased, but genuinely happy. Dad, leaning slightly against the windowsill, was nodding at Liberatore, who stood nearby looking both proud and a little overwhelmed, as if he still couldn't quite believe that this was his family now too. "Show me the ring," I demanded, holding out my hand. Edwidge proudly presented her palm, as if displaying a rare jewel in a boutique window. The ring really was modest, but its elegance lay exactly in that simplicity. It suited her perfectly, gentle, emotional, never one for flashy things, despite how carefree she often seemed. The next hour passed in a blur. We sat in a circle, surrounded by dozens of wedding magazines with elaborate covers, flipping through ideas, discussing dates, themes, dresses, menus, music. Pages rustled under our fingers, laughter echoed through the room, and Edwidge kept bouncing in place, unable to contain her excitement. But at some point, once the chaos settled down a bit, Mom suddenly grew serious, and that familiar tension appeared in her eyes, the kind I knew all too well. "The only problem is, things are a bit tight for us financially right now," she said, carefully smoothing a crease in her dress, as if that detail could somehow cover her embarrassment. "You know, after Dad's hospital stay, and all those bills." I glanced at Dad. He turned away, staring out the window, pretending to watch a bird in the tree. Edwidge tried to keep smiling, but I saw her pale slightly, her shoulders dipping just a bit, even as she made an effort to sit up straight. Without thinking, without the slightest hesitation in my voice, I heard myself say, "I'll give you $110,000 for the wedding." Silence fell over the room like a heavy velvet curtain. Everyone was looking at me. Then, a second later, Edwidge nearly tackled me, knocking me off balance with a hug, fierce, desperate, genuine. "Oh my God, Dorothea. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Even Mom and Dad looked impressed. Mom, gently touching my hand, said, for the first time in what felt like forever, "That's incredibly generous of you, sweetheart." And this time, it actually sounded sincere. Later that evening, while Garino and I were having dinner in our cozy kitchen, I told him everything, still overflowing with emotion. Sitting across from me at the wooden table, he listened quietly, and that familiar soft, thoughtful smile appeared on his face. "I have an idea," he said, setting his fork carefully on the edge of his plate. "What if we gift them tickets for their honeymoon? For Liberatore and Edwidge. As a surprise at the wedding." I stared at him, not immediately realizing he was serious. But that would cost, what, 20,000, he continued, as if confirming my thoughts. I know. I'd use my own savings. I just thought, you mentioned building bridges with your family. Maybe this would help them see me differently. And just like that, tears welled up in my eyes. Sitting in front of me was the man my family called cold, standoffish, arrogant, and here he was, offering to spend his own money to give my sister the happiness she'd been dreaming of. Are you sure? I asked, trying not to completely melt under the weight of his tenderness. He nodded and, wrapping his arm around my shoulders, added, Of course. But let's keep it a secret until the wedding. Let it be a special moment. That night, lying in our bedroom, staring into the darkness and listening to Garino's steady breathing beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe things really would change. Maybe they would finally see him the way I did. Not as the reserved stranger they mistook him for, but as the man who gives more than he ever takes, and does it quietly, without asking for recognition. The next month flew by in a whirlwind. Edwidge threw herself completely into the frenzy of wedding planning, and I was happy to be right in the thick of it. Every weekend brought a new to-do list, and my sister called me nearly every evening, asking for advice. I was genuinely touched that my opinion meant so much to her. What do you think of this place? She asked one Saturday, showing me pictures of an elegant converted warehouse with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. It's smaller than the country club Mom suggested, but it has a lot more personality, I replied honestly. I like it. And it's probably half the price. Edwidge nodded, thoughtfully biting her lip. That's what we're thinking too. We want to keep it simple. 50 people, tops. No madness. I admired her level-headedness. Instead of the typical bride losing her mind over ribbons and rhinestones, Edwidge remained remarkably practical. We spent hours comparing floral arrangements, sampling menus, browsing dress shops, all without blowing the budget. You don't think it's too simple? She asked one afternoon, twirling in a minimalist backless dress that cost half what we'd expected. It's perfect, I said, and in that moment, I thought maybe things really were going to be okay. I assured her that sometimes less is more. Those words, said with a light-hearted smile, seemed to carry extra weight during that time when every little detail of wedding prep filled our days with a pleasant kind of bustle. Step by step, Edwidge and I made our way through it all, picking out fabrics for tablecloths, finalizing the menu, adjusting the guest list. And every time we crossed another task off the never-ending to-do list, I found myself looking forward not just to the wedding itself, but to the moment when Garino and I could give them our gift, tickets for the dream honeymoon she'd always wanted. Garino would occasionally ask, in his reserved way, how things were going, and each time I mentioned that Edwidge had brought up her travel daydreams again, those visions of crystal-clear waters, endless blue skies, and carefree days, I noticed the faintest smile tug at the corners of his mouth. I can't wait to see their faces, he said one evening, leaning back in his chair as we ate dinner at our small kitchen table. Did you look at those resort photos I sent you? Overwater bungalow, direct access to the sea. It's going to blow their minds. His enthusiasm warmed me to my core. This was him, the man my family saw as cold and indifferent, who, in reality, found true joy in someone else's happiness and was willing to give up his own savings and comfort to make it happen. In moments like that, I felt like I was falling in love with him all over again, remembering exactly why I had fallen for him in the first place, and why I loved him more with every passing day. But as the wedding date crept closer, a faint unease began stirring inside me. It wasn't sharp or clear, it felt more like a subtle chill on a sunny day, not enough to ruin anything, but just persistent enough to make you keep adjusting your collar. 2 weeks before the wedding, I suddenly realized where that feeling was coming from. There was still no invitation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Surely it didn't matter, since I was involved in almost every decision. Edwidge was swamped. She probably just forgot. Of course, everything was fine. What else could it be? But the closer the day got, the harder it became to shake off that shadow of doubt. Garino and I had already picked out our outfits, arranged time off from work, cleared our schedules, and planned every detail of the surprise. And yet, there I was, sitting in my kitchen, staring at the calendar, realizing that we still didn't have any formal confirmation that we were even invited. After a sleepless night spent tossing and turning, trying and failing to come up with a rational explanation, I decided the easiest thing to do was just ask directly. Work ended early, so I took a detour to my parents' house. Even from the street, I could tell everyone was home. Mom's and Dad's cars were parked out front, and Edwidge's old, battered Honda was tucked away in the shade. Perfect. Everyone's here, I thought, exhaling, running my fingers through my hair as I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, still trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Just a mix-up. A silly little oversight. I stepped into the living room, greeted by the familiar blend of coffee and vanilla in the air, and with an effort to keep my voice casual, I said, "Hey, Edwidge. I wanted to ask you something. Garino and I haven't gotten an invitation yet. I'm sure it just got lost somewhere." Edwidge, sitting on the couch, glanced around the room, her eyes lingering on our parents as if seeking their approval before she answered. "Oh, yeah. I was just about to give it to you in person." She reached into her purse, pulled out a cream-colored envelope, and handed it to me with an expression that was just a little too stiff, a little too forced, her face stretching into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Here you go," she said, her voice high and bright like someone playing at excitement. I took the envelope, feeling my fingers tremble. The paper was thick, with a barely noticeable pearlescent sheen, the text written in elegant calligraphy. Everything was just as we had discussed, down to the shade of ribbon tied around it. But the moment I reached the line with the name, something cold clenched in my stomach, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. The invitation had only my name on it. Slowly, I raised my eyes to Edwidge, and my voice sounded strange, as if coming from somewhere far away. "Why? Shouldn't Garino's name be on here too?" She straightened up, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I recognized that look, the same one she used to have as a kid when she defied every rule and stared down anyone who tried to correct her. "Well," she drawled, glancing again at Mom and Dad as if seeking silent backing, "we decided to keep the guest list really tight. Just the closest people." The words hit like a slap. I could feel a low, humming pressure building in my chest, unable to believe what I was hearing. The closest? Garino is my husband. Your brother-in-law, for God's sake. Edwidge shrugged, rolling her eyes with exaggerated nonchalance. Dorothea, come on. We all know how it is. He never really tried to be part of anything. Slowly, I turned my gaze to our parents, holding on to the last, almost childish hope that they'd shut this madness down, say, "What are you talking about, Edwidge? Of course he's invited." But Mom just nodded softly, avoiding my eyes, while Dad pretended to study the newspaper in his hands, as if this entire conversation had nothing to do with him. "We support Edwidge's decision," Mom said firmly, as if reading out a verdict, absolutely certain of her own righteousness. "Your husband doesn't even like these kinds of events. He always looks so miserable at family gatherings." I felt something ignite deep in my chest, a slow, steady flame. "That's not true," I protested, but Dad raised his hand, the same way he used to when we were kids, signaling for silence. "Be reasonable, Dorothea," he said in a tired voice, not even bothering to look up at me. "He'll just sit there with that sad face of his, making everyone uncomfortable. Why put everyone through that? Besides," he added, as casually as someone pointing out a great deal, "this way Edwidge can save a bit on catering." I froze. "Save money," I repeated quietly, as if tasting the words, testing if they had really been spoken aloud. You're excluding my husband to save on a plate of food? Edwidge snorted, crossing her arms over her chest as if that made her words weightier, and coldly said, "This is my wedding. I decide who comes. And I don't want him there. He ruins the mood. Let him stay home and code or whatever it is he does." And there I stood, in the very living room where I'd spent my childhood, surrounded by people I had known all my life, trying to understand how we had ended up here. How could they so calmly, so ruthlessly talk about my husband, someone who had never once done them any harm, someone who had been by my side through everything? The worst part was how rehearsed it all sounded, confident, practiced. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, not some fleeting impulse. They had talked this through beforehand, worked out their arguments, nodded along with each other's reasoning, found excuses. While Garino and I were thinking about how to make them happy, they were figuring out how to get rid of him. I took a slow breath to steady my voice. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, and the silence in the room thickened, as if someone had switched the sound off. "You want to exclude my husband, to save money on the wedding I gave you $110,000 for?" For a brief moment, Edwidge looked thrown off, her smug facade faltering, but she quickly recovered. "Well, that's different. You're my sister, and Garino, he's just your husband," I cut her off. And right then, it hit me. "You know what's truly ironic about all this?" I continued, my calm turning sharp and dangerous, like walking across thin ice and savoring every step. "Garino has spent the last 3 months planning a surprise for you. He was going to give you a honeymoon. The Maldives. Luxury resort. Overwater bungalow. First-class flights. All paid for. $220,000. The room went still. Mom covered her mouth, as if trying to catch the air that had just escaped her lungs. Dad's jaw dropped, blinking like he'd just woken from a nap. And on Edwidge's face, oh, that moment will stay with me forever, there was an entire parade of expressions: disbelief, shock, and then calculation. Sharp, fast, predatory. The Maldives? Her voice turned sticky sweet, like syrup warmed in the sun. "Oh my God, Dorothea, I was totally joking about the invitation. Of course Garino is invited. Hang on, I'll redo the card right now." "Silly mistake, honest." She darted toward her purse, pulled out a pen, shuffled through papers, as if trying to erase what had just been said. I took a step back, feeling something close to physical disgust rising inside me. "Don't bother," I said calmly, though steel rang in my voice. "The trip is cancelled." "What?" Edwidge jumped to her feet. "Oh, come on. I told you it was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." "Sweetheart," Mom chimed in, her voice syrupy, almost pleading. "Your sister is just stressed. The wedding, the planning, it's all so overwhelming. You know how brides can be. Of course we want Garino there." Dad nodded enthusiastically, like someone who'd just remembered he was supposed to contribute. "Absolutely. He's family." I looked at them. At those familiar faces I'd known since childhood, the ones that had always seemed so constant, so safe, so mine. And suddenly, I realized I felt nothing for them anymore. No warmth. No tenderness. No attachment. Just emptiness and quiet, seething contempt. 5 minutes ago, they had been united in their decision to cast Garino aside, to erase him like a smudge on a draft. And now, the second they heard about an expensive gift, they were tripping over themselves to smooth it all over, as if that could somehow undo the words they'd spoken. "You're right, Dad," I said, picking up my purse and heading for the door. "He is family. And that's exactly why I won't let you treat him like this." And without looking back, I left the room, ignoring the voices behind me as they blended into an absurd, pleading chorus. The drive home was a blur, like the whole world had dissolved into watery smudges, leaving only the hum of my thoughts and a thick, dull numbness. I don't remember how I parked the car, how I climbed the stairs, how I opened the door. Only when Garino looked up at me from the kitchen did I feel my body again, realize the weight of my bag in my hand, the tightness in my throat, the stiffness in my fingers. He came over, searched my eyes, and I saw the shadow of understanding pass over his face. He didn't ask anything. He simply waited while I slipped off my shoes, slowly, as if each buckle was a lock separating me from reality, and led me to the living room. We sank onto the couch, and I told him everything, without filtering, without sugarcoating. About the invitation. About those weary, condescending glances. About the rehearsed lines. About the sudden change in tone the moment the Maldives came up. Garino listened silently. The same calmness was on his face, that serene composure my family found so irritating, but I could see the pain seeping through the cracks. He didn't ask pointless questions. He only lowered his gaze, nodded slightly, and when I finished, asked softly, "What do you want to do?" "Cancel the trip," I said without hesitation. "And I'm not going to the wedding. I can't sit there and pretend it's a celebration if they think it's acceptable to treat you like that." He looked at me as if I'd just pulled him out of a storm. "Are you sure? They're your family." "No," I shook my head. "You're my family. And I won't let anyone treat my family that way." Without another word, Garino grabbed his laptop, his fingers moving swiftly and confidently over the keys. A few minutes later, the reservation vanished from the screen, the money returned to his account. I watched the word "cancel" freeze in the corner of the page, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Like I'd finally shrugged off clothes that had grown too heavy, leaving me able to breathe again, even if the air felt a bit cold. That evening, the phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It vibrated like a small, panicked creature, lighting up every few minutes with familiar names. Edwidge. Mom. Dad. Edwidge again. I silenced it, but the screen kept flashing, as if refusing to let me forget. When I finally checked the messages, it all became painfully clear. "Please don't do this to me," Edwidge wrote. "The Maldives have always been my dream." "Sweetheart, let's just talk this through," Mom sent. "Don't rush into canceling. Think about your sister's happiness." "It's her special day," Dad added, as if delivering the final word in an endless argument. I scrolled through the thread and realized something glaring. Not a single word about Garino. No one apologized for how they treated him. No one acknowledged the hurt they caused. Their only concern was the trip that slipped through their fingers, the lost luxury, the shattered expectations. Then Edwidge's next message made me let out a bitter laugh. "We already told Liberatori's parents." Of course. The moment I walked out, they must have rushed to brag about the extravagant gift, not even waiting for it to be given. They'd already painted the Maldives in vivid colors, counted the beachside cocktails, and mentally posted the perfect pictures to impress their friends. I typed out my reply. "The trip is cancelled. The money is refunded. Don't contact me again." And, hardly believing I was actually doing it, I blocked my sister's number. Then my mother's. Then my father's. A strange, unexpected silence began to fill my chest, something almost like peace. That evening, without even discussing it, Garino and I put on the lightest, most mindless movies we could find, the kind that asked nothing of you and stir no feelings, and we just sat there watching, pretending everything was fine. Sometimes that was the easiest thing to do. But by the next morning, that peace was shattered. The knock at the door came with such urgency, it was as if firefighters were outside, breaking it down to pull us from the flames. Before we could react, the lock turned, and the door burst open. I didn't even understand what was happening at first, not until I saw my mom, Dad, and Edwidge barging into the house without so much as a knock or warning, as if it were their own private lobby. I froze. Edwidge was the first to the middle of the room, her eyes blazing, her voice already at a shout. "How dare you cancel our honeymoon? You have to reinstate the trip. Right now." Garino stood up from the couch, calm as always, but his voice was firm. "Please, you need to calm down. You can't just barge into our home." They didn't hear him. Or they chose not to. They acted as if he didn't exist at all. "Do you realize how awkward this is?" Mom stepped forward, adjusting her scarf like she was hiding her nerves beneath it. "We've already told everyone about the Maldives. People are expecting the stories, do you understand? Fix this." Immediately, Dad added, jabbing a finger in my direction like a general giving an order. "Call whoever you need to. Get it reinstated. This has to be fixed right now." I looked at them, these people who had once seemed like my solid foundation, my first love, my support, the ones who taught me that family was sacred. And standing there, I realized, there was no family left in this room. There was only entitlement. Just greedy faces who only cared about one thing, making sure someone else paid for their dreams. I held my ground. Even though my heart was pounding in my chest, my voice stayed steady and firm, as if the words had been waiting, gathering strength deep inside me for years. "I'm not giving expensive gifts to people who don't respect my husband and me. The trip is cancelled. And that's final." Edwidge's face twisted in rage. She flushed so red I thought for a moment she might pass out. Her lips trembled, and that stubborn fire in her eyes, the same one that had driven me mad since childhood, was burning brighter than ever. "You know what?" she spat. "Don't even come to my wedding. You're uninvited. I don't want you there." "Edwidge." Garino began gently, as always, still trying to smooth out the chaos, but she cut him off sharply without so much as a glance. "Shut up. This is all your fault. Dorothea used to be fun. She used to be normal before you." I took a deep breath, slowly, letting the air soak up everything I wanted to scream, and shaped it into quiet, deliberate words. "You want to talk about money?" I asked evenly. "Fine. Let's talk about the $10,000 I gave you for this wedding." The color drained from Edwidge's face so quickly it was as if someone had flipped a switch. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Even Mom and Dad went silent, their grumbling cut short as if they'd just heard coins scatter across the floor. "That's right," I continued, just as calmly. $10,000 that, technically, I could demand back right now. Because you just officially uninvited me from the wedding. And that means the event the gift was for no longer exists. Gifts, Edwidge, are cancelled when the celebration they were meant for is cancelled for the giver. Edwidge swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room. All that smugness melted away like smoke. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "No. I wouldn't," I confirmed, nodding. "You can keep the money. Consider it a wedding gift from your awful, no-fun sister who doesn't want to come to your wedding anyway." But the trip." Edwidge's voice cracked, turning thin and high-pitched, like a scared child. "The trip was never yours to begin with," I said firmly. "It was an unexpected gift from someone you couldn't even bother to invite to your wedding. From the man you spent years keeping on the other side of the door like a stranger. Well, congratulations. You finally managed to push us both away for good." Edwidge's face crumpled. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she began to sob silently, like something inside her had snapped. "But I've dreamed of the Maldives my whole life. It's not fair." As if on cue, Mom and Dad surrounded her, wrapping her in comforting embraces, soothing her just as they always had when she didn't get her way as a child. And just like back then, they threw those poisonous glances my way, full of blame, as if all of this were my whim, my cruelty, my stubbornness. I stood in silence, watching as they gently led her toward the door, stroking her hair, whispering calming words. I watched and felt nothing. No guilt. No pity. No anger. Only exhaustion, deep, heavy, like still water pulling me under. When the door finally shut behind them, the house sank back into the very silence that, over the years, had become a sign of peace for Garino and me. He came up behind me, wrapped his arms tightly around my waist, and I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his warm, steady presence. "I'm so tired," I whispered. "Tired of their arrogance. Of them always thinking only about themselves. Of the way they treat you, me, us." "I know," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. I turned to face him, and despite the day, despite the emotional wreckage burning through me, a faint smile tugged at my lips. "You know what," I said, "let's do something with that refunded money. For us." "What do you mean?" "We've been talking about a new car. 20,000 makes a great down payment." Garino smirked, and for the first time in a long while, there was a real, mischievous sparkle in his eyes. "I may have already scoped out a few options. Want to go take a look?" 2 weeks later, we drove home in our brand new hybrid SUV. It was perfect, sleek, stylish, practical. But most importantly, it wasn't just a thing. It was a symbol. A reflection of what mattered most now, our life together, our priorities, our future. Running my hand along the smooth dashboard, I realized that, for the first time in ages, I was breathing freely, deeply. Edwidge's wedding day came and went like an invisible date on the calendar. We spent it exactly as we wanted, just the two of us, away from the city, driving along the coast, having lunch at a quiet restaurant with a view of the sea, talking about everything and nothing. And we tried our best not to think about what was happening back there, in that place where we were no longer wanted. But that evening, once we were home again, curled up on the couch with mugs of hot tea, allowing ourselves to believe, if only for a moment, that this chapter was finally closed, I couldn't resist. Some part of me, like a whirlpool, pulled me toward it, to check, to make sure. I opened Instagram and went to Edwidge's page. The wedding photos were already posted. Professional, carefully selected, flawlessly edited, perfectly draped fabrics, champagne glasses, golden candlelight, liberatory flashing his usual smile at the camera, guests captured mid-laughter in those staged, effortless moments. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became, something a stranger might have missed. Edwidge's smile never quite reached her eyes. In every shot, even the ones meant to look spontaneous, she seemed distracted, strained, like someone desperately trying to prove to the world, and to herself most of all, that she was happy. As if she were playing a part, well-rehearsed but empty. Her shoulders were tense, her gaze kept drifting somewhere beyond the frame, and even during the dance with Liberatore, I saw that same exhaustion. The kind you feel when the party keeps going just because it's supposed to. 2 days later, Aunt Susan called. She had always been my favorite relative, my mom's younger sister, but so different. Calm, attentive, tactful, with that rare ability to listen instead of just waiting to speak. "I need to tell you something about the wedding," she said, and there was something new in her voice. Not gossip, not curiosity, seriousness, almost concern. I froze, bracing for the worst. "Your mother gave a speech. One of her masterpieces of passive aggression. You know how good she is at those." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples. What was it about this time? About the importance of families sticking together. About how some people get too caught up in their own lives to remember their obligations, Aunt Susan said, pausing as if deciding whether to go on. And then she mentioned something about greed tearing families apart. I felt my heart clench into a tight knot. Let me guess, everyone knew exactly who she meant. Oh, honey, Aunt Susan said with a bitter little laugh. It was as subtle as a brick through a window. The whole room froze. Even Liberatori's relatives were whispering, trying to figure out what on earth was going on. So I told her everything. Every detail. About the uninvited husband, the cancelled honeymoon, Edwidge's meltdown, the invasion of our home. All of it. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the occasional pause, as if she was still searching for words. You did the right thing, she said at last. Quietly, but firmly. I've watched for years how they treated Garino. Like an outsider. It was wrong from the very start, and none of it is your fault. Your mother, Edwidge, they've always been that way. They're used to thinking everything has to go according to their rules. And suddenly, I felt tears welling in my eyes. Thank you, Aunt Susan. You have no idea how much that means to me right now. After we hung up, I sat outside for a long time, watching as the sunset painted the sky in rich strokes of gold and crimson. I didn't do anything. I just breathed and looked, allowing myself, for the first time in weeks, to simply exist. Garino quietly appeared beside me, handed me a glass of wine, and sat down. Penny for your thoughts. I took a sip, savoring the coolness of the wine, and said, I'm thinking about family. About how sometimes the hardest decisions turn out to be the right ones. Do you think you'll ever make peace with them? I thought about it, not answering right away, watching the delicate play of light on the glass. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe if they ever realize what they did and try to make it right. But I'm not holding my breath. And I'm done chasing after them. Garino took my hand, firm and steady. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. I squeezed his fingers in return, thinking about how far we had already come. Sometimes life has to fall to pieces so you can rebuild it from scratch, this time without the excess, without the noise, only with what truly matters. My family always thought Garino was an outsider. But he was the only one who showed me what real family means. Not by blood. By choice. By action. By loyalty. By the quiet evenings spent side by side, by patience, by respect, by the ability to love without conditions. And as the sky slowly darkened, shifting from amber to deep blue, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, true contentment. Our new car sat in the driveway, clean, gleaming, as calm and reliable as the future we were building. Our house, now quieter without the constant calls, the guilt trips, the endless reminders of what we owed to family, had finally become peaceful. And sitting there in that silence, I realized this was exactly the home I had always wanted. Not one filled with noisy guests and endless dinners for the sake of appearances, but one where you're respected, where your love is received and kept safe, like the most precious thing. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think of this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. See you soon.